And good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. By the way, I've got to just say absolutely, two things here very, very quickly. I've got to say how glad I am to see this channel continue to grow. We're up to over 8,200 subscribers. It's growing every single day. I am hearing in private messages from more people than I've ever heard from. People expressing their absolute joy and their thrill of hearing and seeing that the Bible is a united whole, makes perfect sense. Now, that doesn't mean it's simplistic, okay? And it doesn't mean it's simple. But they're coming to understand that from Genesis to Revelation, there is a united narrative, a singular narrative of the story of redemption. I love how my good friend Larry Siegel explains when people want to talk about, is the Bible a book of science? Is the Bible a book of history, et cetera, et cetera? Well, there are some scientific facts there in the Bible, to be sure. There's certainly a lot of historical facts. But the Bible is a book about salvation history. That's its focus. That's the purpose of the stories that it tells. And I'm not using the word stories in some kind of false narrative, false myth at all. It takes historical stories and draws a lesson and presents a lesson, a salvation history lesson in presenting that story, and how those stories, some of those stories in the Old Testament, I don't know about you, but at times, especially as a younger man, I would read some of the stories in the Old Testament. One of the stories, the story of Ruth, another story, the story of Esther, and I go, what's the point? What's the point? Oh, well, the story of Ruth is very important for the genealogy of Jesus. The story of Esther is a great story about the story of God's providence and the Messiah. So, when we begin to see, as Larry Siegel presents so well, that the Bible is not concerned with the minutiae of of relating historical facts, it does so accurately. But when the Bible might mention what can be called a scientific fact, it's not focused on those things. It's focused on salvation. Very, very important for us to see. Okay. So that's the first point. I'm just hearing from more and more people who are tuning in and learning about that, pardon me, about that united narrative. And you know what? I better not go into the second point. It would take me too long to develop that, except I just want to say this very, very briefly. And I can get quite worked up about this. I want to thank all of you who support our ministry financially. Now, I don't very often ask for support. And that's not the focus of what I'm doing. Can we use some more? We sure can. But the point of it is, we have supporters who've been with us for a good long while, through, quote, thick and thin, unquote. We've got many folks who contribute $5, $10, $15, $20 a month. And I want to tell you how much we appreciate that. Every single dollar helps us out. It helps us to continue, for me to continue to do what I'm doing full time. Okay? Thank the good Lord, I don't have to get a job at Walmart as a greeter. And I don't have to get a job at a body shop or somewhere like that. Nobody would hire me for that. But the point of it is, I was just thinking about this the other day, how appreciative I am of every single financial supporter that we have. We are, to reiterate, we're constantly in need of additional funds. No, we're not in crisis mode. We sometimes reach that almost, but I just simply want to say thank you. to all of you out there who support us financially, no matter how much it is. We appreciate that more than you will ever know. Everyone from the $5 to the $100. What a blessing you are to our ministry. So thank you so very much. Okay, I promised you yesterday that I want to show, and this is an important part of our establishing that the atonement was not consummated until the parousia. All right? Now remember, Hebrews chapter 9, verse 28 posits the second coming of Christ as part of the atonement praxis. I know that people have objected to that, and they say, no. You have the discussion of the atonement in Hebrews 9:26 and Hebrews 9:24, but in 9:28, all of a sudden, without any indication whatsoever, without a single contextual, oh, by the way, or let me change the subject, or nothing, without a single word in the context of a change of the subject from the Day of Atonement type and antitype fulfillment, all of a sudden we're supposed to believe that Hebrews 9:28, to those who eagerly look for him, he shall appear a second time apart from sin for salvation. We're supposed to believe that's not part of the atonement. That has to do with deliverance from the Neronian persecution or from the Jewish war. Why is the entire chapter of Hebrews chapter 9 devoted to discussing Israel's feast days? Where in all of history can you find any documentation, any suggestion, any idea, hint, clue, whatever, that any of the feast days pointed to physical deliverance from Neronian persecution or from the Jewish war? Now, mind you, I don't doubt for a moment that the Jewish war put an end to the Jewish persecution of the church. That had to do with the filling up the measure of sin. I don't doubt that. My question is, how is that related to the atonement? Okay. So, in order to establish my next point, and that is that, first of all, the atonement has to do with reconciliation. Reconciliation has to do with new creation. And I'm going to drive that home either in the next video or the one after that, okay? Because here's what you got to understand. That first creation of the old covenant of the temple and the the feast days were all related to they constituted the old covenant creation. Yeah, I'll prove that. That means that the passing of that old covenant world was the passing of the old creation. And the coming in of the new covenant world was the creation of the new creation. And again, more on that. That's coming later. For the moment. But to build on that little bitty small introduction to what I'm going to discuss, what we need to see is that Revelation 18 and 19 are recapitulated, retold, reiterated in Revelation 20 and 21 and 22. And by the way, I am absolutely not the first person. Preterists are not the first people who ever suggested this. Modern day world scholars such as G.K. Beale, I was on the dais with him at a conference in Dallas, Texas a few years ago, and he stated on the dais that it's his view that Revelation chapter 20 is a recapitulation of chapters 18 and 19. Well, I've held that view before I even heard of G.K. Beale's position on it. I just saw that as taking place in Revelation. But here, let me, in the very little time I've got left here, let me present this Very simple argument to you. Okay? I've presented this in formal debate. Nobody's answered it. I have presented this in Facebook discussions, and I've had people basically go, yeah, but. No, this is just the way it is. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Paul says, I'm going to abbreviate this for time's sake, then comes the end. When he has put down all rule, all authority, all power, then shall he deliver the king to the Father. Now, at the end, what takes place? Well, first of all, you have Christ, who is the first fruits of the resurrection. Afterward, those who are Christ at his coming. Now, these are little tidbits from 1 Corinthians 15, verses 21 and following. Let me see how to do this as briefly as possible. Then comes the end. So the focus is on the end, all right? At the end, the last enemy is put down. The last enemy to be destroyed is death. Okay, that's as briefly, as succinctly as I can put it. All right. The time of the end is the resurrection at the Parousia. At the end is the time of the destruction of the last enemy, which is death. Therefore, the last enemy, death, is put down at the Parousia of Christ at the time of the end. Okay? Well, we come to Revelation chapter 19. And what do we find? Revelation 19 is the Parousia of Christ. Well, wait a minute. Folks, if Revelation 19 is the Parousia of Christ, then it's the time of the end. If Revelation 19 is the coming of Christ, it's the time when the last enemy, i.e., death, is put down, destroyed, annulled. But wait a minute. According to Revelation chapter 20, when would death and Satan, who had the power of death, Hebrews chapter 2, 10 to 12, when would death and the one who had the power of death be destroyed? At the end of the millennium. Now, if you're going to say that Revelation chapter 20 picks up, or actually just continues, the narrative of chapter 19, therefore you have the coming of the Lord, the beginning of the millennium at Revelation 21 to 4, and then you have the end of the millennium, Revelation chapter 20 and verse 8, and then you have the end of the millennium when Satan is put down, then of necessity, you've got two Parousias of Christ to destroy the last enemy. Wait a minute. There is only one Parousia of Christ in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 at the end to put down the last enemy. But if you say that Revelation chapter 20 is the time of the Parousia of chapter 19, then you are absolutely saying that that's the end. And you're absolutely saying that's the time of the destruction of death. But wait a minute, that violates chapter 20 because death is not put down until the end of the millennium. Satan is not destroyed until the end of the millennium. And let's not forget, death and the last enemy is put down at the Parousia, 1 Corinthians chapter 15. So if you got 1 Corinthians chapter 15 as the Parousia, by the way, Christ puts down his enemies. You know, the beast and the false prophet, they're cast into the fire. Okay. Are they totally different, radically different from Revelation chapter 20 and the destruction of Satan? Well, some people are affirming that that's the case. Because when you set Revelation 19 and 20 as a consecutive narrative, you've got to take that position. But again, that demands two comings of the Lord to put down his enemies and to destroy death. Revelation 19, I'm sorry to repeat this, I'm not sorry, but it's important to see. Revelation 19 is the coming of the Lord, put down his enemies. But the parousia of Christ is the time of putting down his enemies, putting down the last enemy. So you have the parousia of Christ, Revelation chapter 19, to put down his enemies. But Paul said the parousia of Christ is at the end, at the time of the resurrection, when the last enemy would be destroyed. Revelation chapter 20 has the last enemy destroyed, death, and Satan destroyed at the end of the millennium. So, unless you're willing to posit two separate comings of the Lord at two separate the ends to destroy his enemies, and technically both of them being the devil and death, because if Revelation 19 is the parousia of 1 Corinthians 15, then it's his coming to destroy death and the devil. So if you do this as a consecutive narrative, then you have two comings of the Lord, two parousias of the Lord, at the end, at the destruction of Satan. That's not what Revelation teaches. Now, when we see that Revelation chapter 20 is recapitulating Revelation 19, then we can begin to draw into focus the reality and the beauty of the new creation that flows directly out of the second coming of Christ to bring salvation, to bring the new creation. And I'll have more of that on the flip side. I'll see you there.